all the states. And there was a previous administrator in charge, and obviously a different select board, quite different. And at that time, there was less structure to the budget and less transparency from my view. And only because we have a treasurer that had some information about what was really going on in terms of the spending and expending. And we struggled a lot with that lack of transparency. The structure of the departmental budgets was such that each department head really didn't have control over that budget. They had sort of each department had a slush fund in one of their lines. And the paving line was especially vulnerable to that. And if anything came up or there was some other expenses or somebody wanted to do something that the administrator wanted, he would pull from that. And there was no separate warrant article or reservation capital fund for paving, for winter snow removal, anything that really went over and above. He'd pull from the paving, and so what happened was the roads actually continued to deteriorate at that time. So over the next several years, chipping away at that, we gradually got even that administrator to set up more of a discipline, let the department heads have a budget that they could control to. Fire department, he pretty much left that way. So that one, and that was really structured pretty well. But, and what has happened now since Connor has come is that there's been really an adoption of that philosophy that department heads should be accountable for a budget. And within that budget, and if there's an exception, then we created the contingency fund that is available for those purposes to track. If it's an expenditure or an unexpected expenditure, then you can track it and it comes from that fund. And it's documented as what that fund is used for. So that gives much more accountability to it. And in addition, each year, we started with department heads coming in, and then we'd ask them questions. They'd go back, they'd answer the questions formally, and it was a give and take. And it gradually got to the point where, with Connor's help, they came in with those answers already, pretty much. And so now the question has been raised: what is our role? Because we go into the meeting, and we already got a pretty tight budget. And like I said in the meeting last night, everything that we got from the road agent was justifiable and explained in great detail. Now, whether we can afford that as a town, that's to be seen once we get through the whole process. But from our perspective, we have very, very little to contribute to what's already put together, because Connor's done a good job with those department heads to put a pretty good tight budget together to begin with. Gives us less to have to contribute to. So if given that, but now we have worked with the road agents to get a good detail, much like the fire department, fire truck reserve, and all those kinds of things. What is your future need for funding going to be from a capital perspective, which is a different focus from the operating budget. Now let's look at the capital uses over time. Now we have a capital improvement program that looks pretty bad in terms of being able to fund it without going to bond issues or anything else like that, because we no way we're going to pull warrant article funding for everything that's needed. So from my perspective, one of the things we can discuss is the role of the ABC becomes less oriented to the operational and more oriented to the long-term stability and funding that the town is going to have to provide for the services. So, and how we do that and what rules are and how we work with the capital improvement committee and other people in the town to get there, the select board is that second issue. So that kind of a framework that we can talk about. What do you feel about the role of the ABC and what we need to be going forward? And in fact, one of the things that I would put on the table is that in terms of the operating budget, we take the gross aggregate operating budget as when it's finally prepared and that, and really don't try to make it, that you don't bring in the department heads every week the way we do now, because it's all laid out in the budget binder and with the material available to us. And if you look at that as a totality and look at each one, we could just provide potentially questions that we would put together for each department head. And wait a minute, on this line, that's not really done, we've done explained well enough, and we can give us more detail on those items, but very narrowly focused because the overall budget is pretty much. That's just my thoughts. Open it up for comment. We had some issues about what was our role going to be.
Yeah, so I originally thought about this because we're going to the ABC to the select board, and the select board says, well, what does the ABC say? And just like you just said, it's like we don't have anything to contribute to that discussion, right? The budget is already tight. Connor's already worked with them. I didn't feel like, at least when I was standing in for him, I had anything to add to the conversation. And so that got me wondering, sort of, it seemed like at that point we were being more of less of an advisory committee and more of a budget review committee. And if the budget worked well, fine. The other thing that really started me thinking about this was the question about the dam. So are we supposed to be talking, because we spent a lot of time on the dam and what to do with it, right? Remove it, replace it. But is that really what our function is? Is our function to look at that type of issue and try to come to a conclusion ourselves? Or is our function strictly about funding? Should we allocate money to that or not? And so I had, this sort of began to raise questions in my mind as to sort of what is advisory in our system and what does it look like? I looked around at other towns that have advisory budget committees, and they all do it quite differently. Sometimes people meet one time a year and they do a full review. It just seems very different. So I'm glad we're having a discussion today.
I'm only an alternate, but I certainly have an opinion. And I agree with most of what Steve said. But I think where we really become an advisory committee is when we look at the entire budget, when we finally get through the process. And this is mostly what we've done of late, is at the end of things and we see where everybody is, we then think about what's going to be the impact, and that includes the warrant articles because those are substantial. And we think about what's the impact on the tax rate and what does it mean to old people like me who don't have kids in school and are really just trying to hang on. Been in my house over 48 years. I hope to make 50, but I'm not sure I can. And I think the budget being proposed is way beyond anything I would ever support. And I want to have that discussion when we get to the end of all of the budgets being presented. And as Scott said, yes, we're advisory. Not just, but I don't think we're just review. I think voters have certain credibility in what we say. And I think there are a lot of things in the budget that we don't need and would be nice to have, but that's not, to me, a necessity. And I'm really opposed to a lot of what's in the budget. And yes, I can listen to Mark and whoever and say, yeah, that's nice, but I'm not sure it's where we ought to be. So, long term, I've probably been on the budget committee, I would guess, over 20 years. I started back in the 80s. And seen a lot of evolution of where we are. But I don't think we're in a bad place at all. I think we're still very much in an advisory position. I think we're still very much in a review position, so I couldn't hold a big spot then. But I think we have to be very clear about what we really think the town wants. Do we want just young people with big incomes and kids? Or do we want some of the older people to be able to hang around? And to have a budget go up 10 or 12 or 15% a year is not, in my mind, thinking about keeping the old folks around. And I have old neighbors. I talk to my old neighbors, and I think they agree with me that we can't just keep bloating the budget and filling positions that may or may not be needed and saying, yeah, that's where we're going. So that's all.
I kind of feel Peter's sentiment. I think since I've been on here, we've taken like the hard look at the line level where I haven't really seen in those 4 years and the iterations of the select board that they actually push back, right? Like we're always approving positions, we're always approving vehicles, like there's no pushback. Like the department said, we need this, we have to have this, and the select board just says, yeah, it makes sense. And they say, yeah, we support it, where we've had a dissenting opinion on line items, total budgets, capital reserve, warrant articles, projects. So I think it's good to have a different and at times dissenting voice from just the select board with their, this rubber stamping things for years. One thing I did want to mention is in your email, Connor, if the select board doesn't feel non-financial warrant articles like exemptions and credits should be our purview. I mean, it goes to the budget. We don't have an impact on the revenue side of the budget, but more revenue, in theory, you can have more expenses. So if we're gonna have less revenue because we're giving credits and whatnot, then that impacts on the budget side of what we approve to spend.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a case to be made there. I think and Dan can certainly, speak to it too. I think what the select board was trying to say, it seemed like, was that the value that the budget committee brings to the deep dive on the budget and the warrant articles and the funding of those is really valuable, and that's where the focus should be. Everything that is on the warrant and everything that the select board does can be attributed to a cost. There can be a financial aspect of anything. Even the advisory warrant articles that say we're against nuclear war, guess what? It costs money to prepare those warrants. It costs money to print the extra pages because those, warrant articles are on the ballot. And so, but the budget committee isn't going to, weigh in on those. And so I think the select board was pushing the pendulum a little farther on something that raises and appropriates money is what we want to see on the ballot, a recommendation vote from the budget committee on. And so how we left it was looking at the warrant articles early in the, before the warrant is finalized and saying, okay, these are the ones that we want the budget committee to weigh in on with a numerical tally vote. But add to that, Damon, I mean, what else did you hear?
I think I've been on both committees for a long time, or on this committee for a long time too. As long as Peter, it's been a while. I think the select board does pay very much attention to what was decided here. But a lot of this stuff that practically everything we do is going to have a financial impact beyond the nuclear work. It will have. But one of this is a policy, and also we should remember, I think this is important to emphasize this slide. That was my last night. Gee, that's how my day's going. That this is the people's budget, and the citizens are, I think, probably pay very much attention to what the select board says. They pay very much attention to what the advisory budget committee does sometimes. But some of these things that we're talking about, like exemptions, for example, are for a matter of policy that we have to then work the budget around. People who vote on these, they are paying attention to them, and some they're willing to pay for, and some they're not willing to pay for. So when we said, I think last night, we were saying that we think this is a very appropriate. This committee really does excellent work. Sometimes you've actually raised, this committee's actually raised the monies that budget that came out, and actually raised some more, especially for those on equipment reserve, capital reserve. So I think that current configuration is pretty reasonable. Then there are some of these things that I think are different policy sort of thing. And again, I have to remember that no matter what we do in this room or in that room, is that it only counts that day that the people vote for it.
Yeah, I get that. I just think anything that's financial that has an impact on the budget, one way or another, we should have a say or end or vote. Because like the exemption of credits, it's limited by the state. It's an immaterial amount of money in the budget. But what if the states change the statute to you can give up to a 20% credit on an individual's taxes? And the town says, oh, what if we gave everybody that 20% exemption or whatever? That's a huge amount of money that affects the tax rate through the budget, and either raising taxes and raising the tax rate to cover the budget, or you have to cut from the budget. So,
But that's not how it works though, and that's an important distinction. So at a super high level, the way exemptions and credits impact the taxes that people pay has nothing to do with the town's operating budget. At tax rate setting, the approved appropriation less any revenue for the school is added to the total appropriation less any revenue for the town. And all that is added up to say how much money do we need. And then they subtract out anything, or actually they add it in because of the way the math works, but they add in any exemptions or credits that are a part of it. And then they divide that number by the total assessed value and give a tax rate. And so if more exemptions and credits are authorized, it doesn't do anything to the town's operating budget and can't be offset at all with the town's operating budget or other revenue. It's simply on the bottom line when it comes to tax rate setting, redistributes a portion of the total tax liability, town, school, county, among all voters.
but it still has an impact on the tax rate.
It does, yes.
So it's what I'm saying.
But not the budget, but the tax
But
rate.
anything that affects the tax rate.
Yeah.
I think we should be able to discuss.
So that's a better way to define it.
Right,
Yep.
I guess,
Yep.
what I meant to say, but yes, anything that has impact on the tax rate.
Articulable impact on the tax
Yeah,
rate.
and I know it's negligible.
Let me ask you this, what about community power? So are you familiar, surface level community power? This is you know how you can go out and negotiate a contract for your power supply. So you can say, I use this much power, sell that to me at a cheaper rate than Eversource. Eversource still just delivers it, but you pay a community power basically pools all of the ratepayers in a community together and says, we have this much buying power and we negotiate a rate. So it's an opt-out program. So if approved by voters, everybody could opt out of it. You are automatically enrolled, but you don't have to participate, and you can still have a separate contract. But it's a using the collective ratepayers' buying power to have a better rate. It is much more complex than that, and there's some nuances which are a little bit weird. But that'll be a warrant article presented to voters in March. Has a very real financial impact for every individual taxpayer because of the electric bill that they pay. In your opinion, does the budget committee weigh in on that one?
It doesn't have an impact on the tax rate?
No.
Don't care.
And it only bothers you if you buy electricity. If you don't, or you have your own solar cells or
Yeah.
wind farm or something, you're not impacted.
So your recommendation is for the select board to consider setting the threshold as, does a warrant article have an impact on the tax rate?
If I may, to that end, perhaps what we need is a charge that says the ABC will do, this is our raison d'etre, if you will, and that's what we exist for. that is our purpose, and we lay out ahead of time what we're supposed to do. So that we're not here saying, well, kind of what do we do? Where are we? Is that a possibility? That we
Well,
could
you know, the
develop that?
municipal associations, so had, you know, basically their 4 or 5 responsibilities for a budget committee, regardless of whether it was advisory or, you know, an elected group. You know, and it's like, this one says prepare the budget, but realistically, the budget's prepared by Connor and the department managers. So, you know, like Steve says, yeah, it's already presented here, and what we're doing is we're acting as representatives of the other people in town here to go and say, yeah, these, you know, we agree with this, or we don't agree with it. You know, most of the time, we don't go and raise the, you know, the amount of money that we want to spend. We're acting more as a brake on a lot of this. And, you know, maybe, I think maybe we should go and be a little bit more braking than we are, but that's my opinion. You know, yeah, this review, the annual budget is one thing. The capital expenditures should be fairly level on a long-term basis, but it's going to go and change from year to year because of, you know, there's such large chunks of money that are being spent on these items.
What I heard Steve say is maybe a transition, Steve and Scott really, a transition to focusing more, in addition to the operational budget component, but focusing more on the long-term capital investments and infrastructure, the CIP and the long-term planning, because that has as much or more of an impact financially long-term. And so almost just, you know, adding to the scope, but making sure that's a bigger piece of it, because that really hasn't been. And I think, Scott, you mentioned that at the last meeting, it's been very operating budget year to year, with the exception of the capital reserves from a year to year basis, but, you know, but really digging into the CIP and taking that, seems like there's general consensus to start focusing more on that. And then as far as where to draw the line, I mean, I think Dan and I can take back to the board, well, you know, hey, what if it was as clean as, are we going to list a tax rate impact for this warrant article or not? And if we are, can the budget committee have their recommendation on?
Yeah, because like an exemption and credits is immaterial. It's not
Well,
a
that can be
thing.
listed in tax. impact,
Right,
to your
but
point.
us having an opinion, it doesn't really material impact, like if it's a penny, but if you have a bunch of those, you know, the parts are greater than the sum of them. So now you get a bunch of them that, you know, 10 cents, 20 cents here, 30 cents there, they add up quickly. Then you have to decide, well, which one does ABC have to say or not, where you just say tax impact, yes. They get the
Seems reasonable. Are the other members in agreement of drawing a line there for having recommendation
The line where is more dependent.
on having a recommendation on all warrant articles that are listed with a tax rate impact?
Yeah, but I think part of what we have to consider and what the select board ought to consider is that warrant articles almost always pass. I bet well over 90%, always pass. So you have to figure that into what you're doing to the budget by figuring those are going to pass. And again, look at any year, and I'm sure it's 90 or 95 or more % pass. So all of those wishes are built in.
What does that say to you, though? If we were going to reflect on that reality, because you're not wrong numbers wise, but what does that mean to you and what we do in developing the budget and the warrant and what the budget?
It says to me, maybe we're not critical enough and the board isn't critical enough to really analyze whether those things are necessary. And bless her heart, Dawn Hatch just recently died,
Mhm.
but she would complain adamantly that replacement of trucks was ridiculous. She was in that business with her husband and her son, and would just cringe every time we'd replace a truck, because she'd say, could have lasted a lot longer. And just think of it in, if it's a $200,000 truck, 5% would be what, $1,000? $10,000 a year. So can we put $10,000 in maintenance in a truck in a year? And maybe it's too much aggravation, but she felt, we turn things over too quickly. We should make things last longer. They're not in that bad shape. And I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. I don't know anything about that. But that was her opinion, and she certainly had an educated opinion relative to equipment replacement.
But that is kind of the problem, because not a lot of us around this table have that kind of expertise. Maybe I don't.
And to that end, I think we, at some point, we, the town, we have to depend on those that are experts to say, okay, well, yeah. And in previous budget committee that I was on, we had a 30-year-old fire truck, and we had people saying, oh, we can re-weld this, we can do that. But at some point you have to say, well, we could do that, but what if it breaks on the way to your house when your house is on fire and the truck doesn't get there? Or what if it breaks and somebody gets hurt? Because I think we have to keep those considerations. And I think that's where we have to depend on those that are experts in these subjects to say, yeah, we need it or we don't. And then with the warrant articles too, even though they get approved, that's still the voters making that decision. We're presenting it to them and we can say we approve or we don't approve. And I think there's great value in an opinion from the ABC saying the budget committee does not recommend this warrant article. I think people pay attention to that. But if we do recommend it, they pay attention to that as well. So I want to, we do that as well, right? It says in the warrant article, but then it's the voters approving it. So.
But we don't ever give a reason why we differ from the select board. So, library, I took a lot of crap. Why don't we just vote like the select board does? Right? Aren't we just trying to do that? And I said, no, that's not our real objective. That's not our remit. But got into this question of, well, we're not really, you stood up last year, you made that case, but I wonder if we almost want to have some more formal mechanism to actually explain why
In the voter guide?
we're thinking in the voter guide or something that really gets more than just how we vote.
Almost like a court opinion, where even if it's a split vote, the majority of whatever the opinion is, recommend or not, prepares a 2-sentence statement that says the why, and we include that in the voter guide.
And those.
Or a
those who
5-page
vote against
dissenting
it.
opinion.
Right? So I wonder, so I'll ask NHMA first, because they provide free legal service. The voter guide can't advocate. The purpose of the budget committee preparing a recommendation is to advocate. And so we include the recommendation in the warrant article. I don't think we include in the dissent or the opinion in the warrant language, but I wonder, I'll make sure that we can include that in the voter guide, or if it would have to be.
It's not advocation. What if it's just saying, here are the issues, here's what we've considered.
Yeah, we don't support this because, and it's a.
But could we also just publish that
A paper.
ourselves? And it's here at town hall.
Yeah.
The opinion of the budget committee.
Yeah.
Here it is.
I like
Concerning
that.
the warrant articles, concerning the budget, here it is.
You just add it to the
We do
budget,
that,
right?
Right,
As a Word document or PDF.
exactly.
Because I don't think anybody could argue that the typical voter really is clueless as to what they're voting on. I worked at the receiving end of the ballots and have had many, many people ask what they just voted on.
I know,
They turned in their ballot, they said, so what was that?
I know.
Shouldn't they ask before that?
Let me ask you,
So,
Peter.
no, let me finish.
Please,
So
sir.
I think most people are just going with the flow, are not thinking about what it means to them, tax rate. Again, we vote in March, we see the repercussion of that in December. So most people just say, well, yeah, that sounds good, let's do that. And I think that's something we have to acknowledge, is that we have to better educate them in some way. And I'm not even saying that putting it in print would educate them, because most people don't know and most people don't bother to care. And that's a shame, but that's the society we're in. And again, I think it's too bad, but that's reality to me. And you can disagree if you wish, but I think that's where we're at.
I don't have any problem going on to Barrington Conversations or Barrington Community, websites there and going and posting links to the budget site, on the town site saying, hey, this is what we talked about. So that's one way of getting the word out there, because there's probably about 2,000 people that, regularly go and look at those particular pages. But there's maybe generous that it may not be generous, so,
Peter, do you think the voter guide, so last year was the first year since I've been here that we prepared a voter guide, comprehensive voter guide, by warrant article, layman's term description. Do you feel like that moved the needle in the right direction? Do you think that was time and energy well spent preparing that? Or do you feel like because it was in print, if people aren't going to read the warrant ahead of time, they're not going to read that ahead of time?
I agree with the latter. I think they're just not gonna bother. Their time is too valuable to them and they just go in ignorance. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. I just think they don't know and they aren't gonna bother to know.
An idea that we had, and that I think that we'll implement, and maybe there's a role for the budget committee also, I don't know. We have a captive audience of voters likely on January 23rd with the primary election. And I intend, and the select board is agreeable to this, to have as many of the select board members as are available sit at multiple tables in the cafeteria at the middle school with big signs that say, ask me about the library, ask me about the community center, ask me about the town center, ask me about the budget, and facilitate those conversations. These are people showing up to vote. Maybe they don't have a ton of time, but maybe they can spend 5 minutes talking to a select board member or me, or maybe a budget committee member about these topics. We don't always have that opportunity because it's only every 4 years that we have a primary election in January, February. But that's something that we're going to try to do on the digital side, which I feel like it's easier to come up with new ways to reach people on the digital side because, that's the tools that we have. But we want to create an interactive voter guide, essentially, where people go through and almost like a survey. They're presented with each one of the warrant articles, the details of the voter guide or anything else, links to anything else, and they can click through that way and even register their decision and print off like a voter guide so they can take that in. When there's 25 warrant articles, they can refer to that and say, okay, when I was sitting down and had the hour to read through all the details, these are the opinions that I have. Whether that will move the needle any more than the voter guide, I don't know, but we're always all ears. Don't hesitate to let us know what you think we can do or what you think the budget can do.
But even within this, it gets more complex. I guess you go more long-term, maybe a little bit more strategic, but I mean, I mentioned to the select board the other day, it seems like there should be an overarching view of here's where we're going and vision, and that's what the master plan is. And I almost wonder if our decisions have to be in some way tied to the master plan. Really, the community has spoken. I think there's pretty good involvement in that.
No, there is not. There are certain people that are involved in the town who got involved with the master plan. And we farm out the master plan to Stratford County consultants, and they suck.
They do. I would agree.
They really do. I'm sorry. I won't tell you like it is. I participated in the last.
But I think you get the broad trend, right? You get broad trends, and I think that those broad trends.
Well, but they do it by a survey. And they look at the responses that came in. They don't even give you the breakdown of the demographics of who replied to what and why they ended up with this conclusion, which is in the details of what they had. And you'll find out if you really look at the detail of who participated, it was very sparse participation in the survey.
I don't know how long ago you're talking, but I mean, the two that they're updating recently, I mean, the select board, even just last night, the members on the housing chapter were talking about how they took a deep dive into the demographics of who replied. And they had 500 survey responses and had a pretty even bell curve of age of respondents and other demographic data. So, I mean, they're paying attention to that now. I don't know if they always have. I don't know when you're talking about when you were involved.
But let me just step back. If it seems to me that you have to look at this, if you're going to look at the longer term, just like you look with your own budget, You can start planning, okay, my kids are gonna go to school. Well, given my reality, they're gonna go to state school, or we're gonna try to get them into Harvard, more expensive. You take into account where you're trying to go as you do your budget. And right now, today, I feel like all we do is talk numbers.
But
dollars and cents,
I
but
totally agree with that concept of what problem are you solving? Where are we going? What is a vision of the future? I'm just saying, the master plan may not be it. You've got a capital improvement plan that may or may not be in sync with, and I don't think it is totally in sync with the master plan. So that process is still evolving, and what should the role be of the ABC in helping that process go? Because that's where you really get into people that don't understand, and the consultants don't really understand the financial ramifications of some of the things they're saying. That's our future. What's that going to do to the tax rate is not even considered in those. So that's an issue that you're going to have a disconnect between the master plan and what's going to result in the tax rate impact in the future. So that could be an enhancement that I think we could contribute to that discussion to be able to help develop that kind of material. Because that's really where we come down. What are the cost benefits of what you're recommending in the future? Well, if you look at some of the things in the area, we want to have the town exactly like it is, rural and da-da-da. We don't want any changes. Well, how does that, why are we doing all this other investment? So, and then which demographic, when you look at the demographics, they give you the overall demographics. They don't give you the demographics by response, which is the detailed deep dive that you need to do to take a survey and make sense out of it. Was it the retired people and the elderly people that answered that way and the young people that answered this way? Then they have to look at that as to what does we do as a town and who are the representatives and who are the citizen stratas that we're trying to represent and provide for. And providing for the retiree that's got a fixed income and every increase is going to hit them, who's already hurting. Or are we trying to bring more kids in and better people that can work and contribute to the tax rate by but not their income, but by the type of housing they have? These are the kinds of issues that I think that today we could do a better job in connecting those dots. And that to me is we've just already talked about, well, the ABC and the CIP should get together. Yeah, I agree. The ABC and the transfer station committee should get together and talk about how we look at what impacts are. And those are all good things. And it really, it's going to borrow, we'd be getting more time to this, but that's where I think we could contribute a lot is by making those connections and get an even more thorough understanding of what their goal is. And then have meetings with the select board potentially when we come to those kinds of policy issues. For example, one of the issues that came up in the transfer station discussion is what percentage of the fees or of the budget for the transfer station should be town responsibility and what should be user responsibility, usage kind of thing. And is there a cutoff? Should it be 100% this or 90% that? Those are kind of discussions that would be benchmarks for us to try to look at when we make evaluation of that budget. And are there fee structures at the budget level we want them to have? That to me is the kind of policy decision we should have on just about every budget we do. Now, do you want 24/7 support and coverage by the fire department and EMS? Do you not? Do you want 24/7 double coverage for the police department? Well, those all have tax impacts, no question. And while we're not the policy board, we could make decisions that then the select board can then use to help them make the proper decisions when those kinds of staffing decisions are made, because they have a major impact, but on services. So when we look at that, look at the transfer station, well, who uses it? Library, same discussion you can have. Why is it that the town absorbs more of that, or should there be more, because some of the community fees they do and cooking classes and things like that. Which they should get fees for that, the same way we asked the rec department to do the same thing for their programs. So some of the library programs should they be? Can they be? I don't know, some of the rules that we have to live by and say, no, some things they can't charge for, but the town has to be responsible. So those are policy decisions that I think the ABC has not participated in totally, and we might want to say that's where we'd like to be able to participate.
And again, that's where I would go back to. I think we need some directions, some guidelines. This is what we exist for. And we are, in the future, we are going to do A, B, and C. Here's how we're going to do. We almost need a charge. This is the material that you sent around spoke about official budget committees. But for advisory, it just basically says, do whatever you want. So
I would point out that we have 5 elected select board members and we have 5 and 2 alternates appointed here, that none of us are particularly representative of our population as individuals. People on this committee are all volunteers. And you've taken the initiative to be part of this. Voters are different. I don't think we're particularly representative of our population here. One thing, except when Amy comes to visit, there are no women here. John's young. Some of us are older, some of us are in between. But I'm not sure we're particularly representative of the population as a whole.
Well, there's no question.
But then you also.
I would go and say that it's more our personal circles that we're representative of. There's about a dozen people that I talk with on a monthly basis and that have input into, why are we spending this, much money on that? And they'll say, because of these particular reasons, and, if you want to go and see the particular, the specific things that are being spent on, go to the town website. And, I've even gone so far as to go and print out the spreadsheet and say, look, this is where it is. But again, that's only about a dozen people for me. And it's not a formal relationship.
But there's also, we're only a portion of the tax rate. I hesitate to say this, but there's a whole school and there's not really an advisory budget, a real advisory budget group for them. So, also, do we throw everything up and say, should we have more of a view of the entire budget process? And I know that that's charged and probably unavailable, not something that we could do, but just throwing it out there for re-looking at this.
to move to an
Having a
official.
town-wide advisory budget.
Oh, town.
Still advisory.
Well, there are
Still-
some towns that do have
Mhm.
a combined budget group.
Yeah.
For school and.
Barrington used to.
And we did in Rollinsford. We had both school and, and town. We did it both.
I mean, it was good, because I think we had a conversation with those towns and they had a very professional budget committee. I'm not sure if it was an elected committee or not, but may have been by the town itself. And they really thoroughly controlled the budget and school and municipal. But that's not the situation that we have here today.
I will say, one of the things I love about this group is, yes, we do have different social circles, but yet what comes in here is not about politics. It's really a very good group of people that we have here, and I think we do a good service for the town. And so, I just say hats off to us too.
Yeah, and one of the things that I struggle with, and Mark was very good in his presentation, why he needs to replace a truck. Unfortunately, what he said was, it's because we didn't maintain it right and we let it sit and rust away. And You know, whereas the fire chief says, well, no, based on the dual structure of what we have to be very careful because rust can get in there, so we have to do extra maintenance, but that's what we want to focus on. So, and like Dawn did, I'm sure Dawn never let a truck rust away the way that it happened here. And that's not because Mark was, it's still new to the process, but the prior person, and this, so something that the town did is costing the residents more because of inadequate maintenance for whatever cause. And that's a budget impact to show, should we be making, I mean, we don't have the expertise, but we need to get it.
But does it also mean?
To say, what are the options?
If you're talking about vehicles or construction equipment and that, I can tell you from an Air Force equipment standpoint that Barrington goes and makes their vehicles and equipment last longer than the United States Air Force does.
Yeah, but we can't print money, that's the thing.
And again, I don't want to get in there criticizing each of the department. For me, the question is, what is that? What's the implication of that? Maybe the implication of that is we need to focus on the transfer station and either doing short-term investment or long-term investment to make sure that all the equipment are covered.
Well, I think what we've asked for from the fire department is when he asks for, he knows he's got a big new pumper that's gonna have to replace, so what are the options? And what can you do to elongate this? So if we can ask those questions, don't just come in and say you need it. Tell us what the options are and what the cost of that option is. And that hasn't always been there.
Yeah, I know, I agree. There's verified, but there's also becoming not more solution focused. How do we fix this going forward? Because nothing we can do, right? We can, it's up to, I think it's really the Connor to decide how to deal with those particular issues and how do we surface them earlier. I'm not sure I want to get into that, but I do want to make sure that going forward, once it is identified and there is a budget impact, which there is, there's at least a plan to overcome it in the future. Shit always happens, right?
I think the issue with the truck rusting, that's more a management issue for the manager or the administrator and the select board, not us. I mean, it's got an impact, but if we have vehicles that are rusting in the corner, I don't think that's our place to say, do that. It's his place or the select board's place to say,
I would do this. I would have said leaving your truck sitting was probably good for the truck. That would have been my initial reaction. I now know that was incorrect, but I'm not a.
When I lost my pickup because of rust, because I sit on the grass.
I lost my vehicle because of rust and I ran it every day. So.
What I think, what we can say though is there, if the truck is gonna sit, is there some sort of mechanism for maintenance or like oil undercoating or whatever that can be done for $600 that saves $100,000 in 5 years? Like, so from a budget standpoint, we say, hey, if we give them a little bit more maintenance, it creates there's longevity. There's a short-term investment for a long-term impact. And I think that's what we can bring up.
Don't forget, we're talking about a 19-year-old truck though.
Right,
I mean, we're not talking about a truck we bought 5 years ago and get rusted out.
It's more
Yeah.
thinking, is there something this group collectively can think outside the box or raise the questions, whether, we could ask a question that could be completely out of whack and inappropriate for the situation, but at least it's a thought towards how can we protect the budget?
If you want to go and keep that particular truck would need to be definitely remanufactured, which means strip it completely down, replace the frame, and then rebuild.
Sounds like a good truck.
That's basically what a depot maintenance program does.
We've done that. So, a vintage truck.
And yeah, you may be able to go and get another truck that'll last another 19 years for half the price of that. But still, half the price of it is $200,000 or more.
again, with that, does that get into the whole fleet management system? Maybe we don't keep them for 19 years, maybe at 10 years. If there's still value to that truck, we sell it. And we take the money and we get something new, and that way we don't have the long-term maintenance. But that, to me, is a fleet management issue, and that's why we hire somebody to manage those issues. That knows
I believe
trucks.
that that is exactly where I would hope we could go when we meet with the capital improvement program and we look by department, the way they put it together. You know, okay, here's what your projection is in terms of replacement. What can we do to extend or elongate that and what we have to add in terms of maintenance and preventive, this, that, and the other thing to extend that life of each of those items that's in the capital improvement. So, and it's the same thing with the road, okay, by adding a different mix of asphalt will elongate the number of the years that road will last before we have to take a major hit to it again. So that's a kind of questions that we would love to be able to look at to help make them make the right decisions for the long term.
So how do we get that information and do that? That's, Yeah.
That is where, when I look at this capital improvement program, and it's a long period of time. When I put it all together, year by year and so on, we can look at, well, what are the alternatives to try to push some of those things out further so we don't have to contribute as much each year, especially in the early years. Because the solution now is, oh, we gotta catch up. Oh, I gotta catch up right now. No, well, maybe not. I haven't heard about, give us an option that kicks us up slower. And what's the cost of that? Those are the kinds of things that really push people. And of course, they don't have a lot of time to do that, but we can still ask the questions that we think we need to really see what the financial position will be.
Right, so there are two pieces. There's one for this year's budget and one's longer term plan. We may look at those in two separate lights and at two separate times during the year tackling.
Well, we do that with the warrant articles. But those warrant articles are really focused on specific items and not aggregate
So maybe
needs.
after the budget is done, we start to look at that long range planning, because there's a whole bunch of discussions that are gonna happen there beyond sort of conversation.
Well, I think some of it, that's true. And I think that's one of the things that we've heard recommended is that we get together with the capital in a different time frame. And it's not,
Late spring, early summer.
or whatever, so we can really do a much more deeper dive when we have time to vote to that. But when I look at the warrant articles for this year, there's already some that have that, oh, we gotta catch up so that we can get the stuff that's coming down the pipe shorter term in front of us. But then that gonna change over time. And I think the other discussion we need to come is there's no way we can do this with capital reserve. We're gonna have to have some bond issues.
And that's what was recommended. I mean, that CIP was fully, the select board adopted a plan that fully funds that CIP out to 2034. Now, the biggest bite of the apple was a $10 million bond to cover the big infrastructure projects on Young Road, Deer Ridge, Toland, and Malago. And that's the biggest, and the select board talked at length about the benefit or the drawbacks of bundling those. Peter Rice might never drive on Young Road, but he drives on Toland Road every day. And so as a voter, he might be more inclined to support an infrastructure project, knowing that there's investment being made in his area on roads that he drives on. Or maybe, he just thinks it's gonna drive more water onto his property, and so I'm not gonna vote for any of these infrastructure projects, but,
Make drivers do 50 instead of 60.
yeah, there we go, yeah.
We'll get you a dam though if there's a lot of water.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think having input from the budget committee would be immensely valuable. But there is a starting point. There is a funding plan as a starting point to say, okay, where do we move these ponds from here? That we don't have to come up with a starting point and then negotiate it. Start from what is recommended, the capital reserves, the bond for the library, the bond for the public safety building, the $10.5 million bond for the infrastructure projects. I met with the superintendent on Monday, and they are very likely amending their part of the CIP as it relates to the elementary school. Right now, it's in there for 10 classrooms at $10 million or something like that. They think they're going to do a much smaller scale addition, maybe asking voters for money in 2027. and likely to cost much less than $10 million. That won't be updated in the CIP until the next round next year, but that's promising news. So not that we have purview of that, but
Because they got 2025 looking really
Right.
sad. $21 billion worth of capital improvements.
right. So yeah, that 10 million is going to be moved out and be less is the message I got on Monday.
You got a place we can put school. So in small offices, small independent classrooms, only 1.1 million.
You want to know something? Oh yeah, there you go. Tracy Hardikoff had a good suggestion. She said, if and when they need space, don't add on to the building, move the SAU. Put instructional space back in the SAU that was originally in kindergarten. Buy the old town hall for SAU offices or put SAU offices somewhere else. That building can be a school very easily again, the SAU building, and it's on the campus. The SAU office doesn't need to be on the campus with the school. So use that infrastructure as it is. I thought that was a pretty savvy suggestion. I haven't passed along to school counterparts yet, but I will. Let's just say that was last night. What are the action items? What am I hearing as action items? I have take back to the select board, tax rate impact as a threshold for making recommendations for warrant articles.
Yeah, both short-term and long-term.
Yep, I have from Bill a desire to have a more specific charge from Bill, but it sounds like it's echoed. I don't know how we arrive at that. I don't know if we pull pieces from the official budget committee, parts that are in the RSA and say, okay, hey, this is what they do. I don't know if we ask the members to jot some bullet points down that, hey, this is what I'm in it for. This is what I want to contribute. Scott would say something like, make sure that we're tying the budget and expenditures to master plan or whatever big picture plan exists. John might say, make sure that we limit increases as much as humanly possible because my kids are out of school and I want taxes to decrease because I don't care what education or services look like anymore.
Right.
And that's, what he's in it for. So then we mash all these together into a charge. I don't know the best approach to accomplish that. What do you all think?
What specifically does the select board value out of the advisory budget?
The in-depth analysis, Dan.
No, I agree.
In-depth.
We do pay attention collectively. We appreciate your more comments, probably would be useful, especially those places where you dissent. This is what our concern was. We want to rethink it should be less or more or whatever. We do pay attention because we know the committee looks in great detail at that. And select board doesn't look in the same detail that this committee does on each of these items.
And I would say
We do
that's
other
on,
things till 10 o'clock.
yeah, but that's on us, right? We could come out of every budget committee with something that we want to present to the select board, good, bad, or the other, just.
Well, your notes are part of our packet, so.
Yeah.
But I like that idea. Like I'm hearing from Peter for the first time since we've been meeting that there's some parts of the budget that he's really dissatisfied with. I think on a gradual basis, introducing those specific concerns or changes as we go through the process, maybe reserve any sweeping changes until the end of the process, but bringing those specific as points of conversation so we don't get to the meeting in December and we're digging back through all of the department budgets to say, okay, hey, these are all the things. Because it could be that one of the specific things Peter has a concern with is the fire department doesn't need an administrative assistant right now. And that's a way to save us, I forget, $20,000.
Nor do you.
$25,000. Do I? Do I have one in there? In the budget?
Another part-time person.
No, I don't. News to me.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if we keep it out of the individual issues today, the question is, what is the budget committee gonna do? And that's
Right.
really what I'm more focused on, because we will probably have a lot of
No, you're-
hardcore discussion.
I'm the youngest of my neighbors, so I'm representing the old folk.
That's cool.
Some of them. Some of the old time film, perhaps, anyway, but not just old clothes. I think it would be useful to hear. We had concern about this particular item. And we decided it was okay, but do we really need an assistant? And yes, the collective say, yeah, we probably do. I think it's reasonable to say, do you really need that person? And I don't think we hear that much. We do go through the notes.
Yeah.
I think that's where our role has been. I think what I'm hearing from Peter, and heard it with the comment last night from a citizen that said, yeah, but there's the whole thing of who's going to benefit from all these investments and the things that you're doing by adding staff and this, that, and the other thing, which really gets into the policy thing. Which says, when we look at the overall aggregate budget and look at the ability of townspeople to pay that budget and that tax rate, is that excessive for the purposes that we have? And we cut back? And I looked at the paving budget and the other things that are there. And I said, we can't pay that's what we're going to approve until we see the total picture. So I don't know how we avoid not waiting until later once we know all the revenue and everything else.
But you have it all, right? Because it's all, nothing has changed in the budget from when that binder was printed. So all the numbers
The
are,
revenue's not.
the revenue's in there.
But maybe the revenue capital is a separate meeting, right?
Well, it's the operating budget too, because we haven't had that discussion. It
Yeah,
says,
but that revenue,
can we afford it and what's it gonna mean in terms of the total presentation and effect on the tax rate at the end, which has to include all the warrant articles as well.
last document, chapter 5, is the projected revenue for 2024.
But again, what I,
The tax rate hasn't been set, we haven't got some of the input from the state yet. That's your estimate.
It's always an estimate.
I think rather than going line by line with over 10%, even if it's $100, maybe is what we should be focusing on in these meetings. Maybe some of the broader issues for these departments that we should be talking about, and that's the focus of the discussion. Maybe it becomes less about a budget review, that becomes more of a minor piece, and maybe more of a sort of a different discussion about the longer term, as if or budgeting.
So that's the one.
So then would we seek from the department heads, sort of, instead of a spreadsheet line items, give us your look ahead of what you anticipate your needs, where the your department are, and put that down there, and then we get together and talk about that. And if we're going to do that, at the risk of having more meetings, I think we need more time, and maybe we need to start earlier.
Yeah.
In order to get into this, because otherwise I feel very rushed when we get in here and it's one thing after another. Do we need to start earlier in September, August, and take our time with these things so we can make the recommendations for the select board? And
I think that's, and I really feel that the capital improvement program is something that we can use as a discussion vehicle to make that happen. Because that's where they laid out their needs and what they think they buy time. And what the tax impact would be.
And we might need to incorporate staffing into the CIP somehow. So the CIP doesn't contemplate like, hey, the police department expects they need an additional 2 officers in the next 3 years. That doesn't address that, but it might be valuable to have that in the same place. Maybe it's not in the spreadsheet part of the CIP, but maybe it's in the narrative part of the CIP, where there's, 1, 3, 5 year projections of an outlook for the department. Where are we headed? Where are we seeing services go? So the select board talks about it at length. And I feel like we're in a really good spot with the select board understanding, like the administrative assistant in the fire department, that's been part of the succession management plan in the fire department for 5 years. And the fire chief, put put together listen, we need to hire 2 more full-time people and we need an administrative assistant and I'm retiring. And this is the timeline that we're going to try to accomplish that on. The select board and voters have approved the 2 additional people. This is the administrative assistant we scheduled to retire in 2026. And so that is, the select board has had that, but it's not really reduced to a planning document like the CIP or otherwise. And so there would be value in that. And there would be value, I think, and this is your point, about involving the budget committee in those conversations in a time frame that allows a deeper dive and not.
And Mark said the same thing, in order to support the new roads that come with every development, he's gonna have that staff, and there are the challenges we have in doing that.
And so if you want to maintain the vehicles, you have to have a mechanic.
Yeah. We can.
But it also gets into the revenue side. So, right, what are the revenue projections and how does that affect everything? And so it all fits together.
Well, a lot of it's gonna be the tax rate.
Right,
So
the
less
tax
than
rate,
50%.
it depends who comes in, how many places we have, what's the impact of that.
And when it's gonna hit.
Yeah, I'm
Because
just
that
saying.
will be the total ask each year. You're right. I think that's a very good thing. You've got the capital ask and then you've got the operating ask each year. And then you factor in inflation and all those kinds of things to see what that's gonna do to the overall budget projections for each year. And that's what we don't do.
Here's an interesting. We haven't said this word yet. It's going to come up, I suspect, because of this involved taxation, taxation incremental finance district. Not again.
That we should.
Yes, again.
It should be.
Yeah.
Because that's one that's focused to who the benefit is going to be for those investments and that where they draw it. And it's not just passed on to the overall population until later.
But yeah, there needs to be more communication. I don't know how to communicate more around that particular issue, but my view is everybody thought, oh, it's gonna be direct fast and. It's just, there's a lot of discussion of how do you do this, right? You can't just do it at a deliberative session. How you get people to listen, as we've talked about before, I don't know.
TIF is very difficult. What it really means to.
But again, I think John would agree with me that yes, it means no more tax on individuals, but it means less revenue. And that's the consideration that's important to me, is if you're reducing revenue, indirectly, you're increasing tax.
Or you're cutting services.
Precisely.
But presumably you're not doing it in isolation. You're doing it for a particular reason. And that gets back to the master plan, right? It gets back to our funding. Well, why do we need to do this? Maybe it's not just a funding. It's not just a money thing. There's a real reason to do that. And I don't know
Well,
that we talk about.
I know, Connor, you made one comment when I asked a question of how much of the capital improvement program items would be in the TIF. You said none. Oh, well, that's totally different. And when you look at that, because that means that the TIF impacts would have to be part of the considerations if we have.
Well, yeah, the TIF district does reduce the tax operational fund, but it does put more of that tax fund into capital improvements. So presumably if it's part of SIP, balances out because we have an operating budget that goes here, then we're going to put a cap on top of that. And the taxes are up here, what's on top. And if it's a TIF district, then a lot of that money goes into the capital improvements. And directly into the capital improvement program.
But for that specific area.
Well, but yeah, but it's the town, if the town doesn't have a TIF and we decide to have an improved town center, if the taxpayers suggest that as the SIP would indicate they do, then those taxes for that period are going to go directly to the CIP, which presumably enhances the overall benefit to the town. Not us old guys, but
I know what you're saying, but I think there are a lot of ifs in what you're for it.
Well, and I think it really is hard to do verbally. You really need to say, let's look at what happens with taking some examples, concrete examples of what's in the TIF district here and what you're gonna be doing.
I'd have to see the map.
Right. Yeah, that's it. I mean, what investment, what are they gonna add to infrastructure over there that might have been something we would have done out of operating out of the warrant articles or somehow, because the improvement of parks or this, that, or the things that are gonna be part of the TIF, that would be offset by what they do. Well, what does that mean to the operating tax rate for the normal maintenance services that are being provided to the same people in the TIF now? That they're not getting that incremental tax rate assessed to them. So that's the project.
There's no additional assessment.
Yeah.
It just skims new value. So people in TIF district pay the same in taxes as they would if they
And
weren't.
if the tax rate goes up,
It doesn't
but
have,
no assessment goes up for that.
nope, assessments go up,
Assessment goes
they,
up.
just the same as
So
everybody else.
that's what's missing is that whole projection.
Oh, yeah.
Who's paying what
Yeah, yeah.
component?
This
As
is why I
I
say what's
if I
called
put
the
10 million, if I put $10 million into the TIF and they're doing it, the TIF does that $10 million.
Mhm.
What happens to the other town expenditures and tax rates for what they have? Does
Yeah.
that come out of our pockets or does that come out of their pockets too?
Yeah, the simplest way to describe it is it's a deferred tax base expansion, right? So when you have development, it expands the tax base. That's not necessarily new revenue. That's just new tax base. You divide the money that you need among more value.
But to be able to
But
communicate, that's not going to communicate to the
Deferring
residents.
deferring the tax base, you take the revenue from the new tax base, you reinvest it in the area temporarily, and then that tax base goes back on whatever time frame. And so, like the 80 units that are being built behind the urban, if we assume for a minute that the decision has already been made, that residents want a park behind Kale's Country Store, and that park is going to cost $600,000. We assume that that decision's already made. There is an option where that's a warrant article and people raise the money to pay for that through property taxes straight away. Or with a TIF district, as a funding mechanism, we take and say, we're going to take the taxes that 80 units is going to pay in the next 10 years. And that's not going to go into the tax base, but they're going to pay directly for this $600,000 park. And then once it's paid for, that value of those 80 units is going back to the tax base. And so we're not raising your taxes. We're temporarily, limiting the growth of your tax base. And then the tax base grows, to what it was afterwards. Now, the real value, other than additional services, is the idea that investments like that park or like infrastructure investments attract additional commercial development so that the tax base is bigger
Or
as a
residential.
result. But if we're talking the town center, which is zoned commercial, it isn't zoned to be residentially developed like general residential zoning district. And so
So why are those 80 units residential?
that's in the village zoning district. That's not the town center zoning district. And the planning board changed the zoning on that.
And
after
that's
it
why
was
some of
approved.
the people are confused and they don't say, well, I don't understand it, so we're gonna go and say no.
Yeah.
That's right.
You
It
know,
hasn't been
so
explained.
that's part of it, they don't know, and they're gonna say no, or they don't want the finances done that way, and they'll say no,
No.
or there's a group of people that don't want to see the town center developed more than it already is, and they're gonna say no. So,
But we have an obligation, in my view, to understand it. And so, this is something that we need to get better.
Well, I
at.
know, and if from a taxpayer's perspective, what is the assessor going to attribute? How are they going to assess what was at the time that was frozen? As what that assessment increase would have been if it stayed with no tip.
Well, that happens every year anyways. Assessed value is a snapshot in time every year on April 1st. So the condition of a property on April 1st of any year is the value of that property for the tax year. And so, for example, the 43 units across the street from the middle school, phase 1 was done as of April 1st this year, but phase 2 hadn't started construction. So the assessed value of that property for this entire tax year is basically just phase 1. but they had built out phase two almost completely by now. And so on April 1st of 2024, that added value will be picked up in that snapshot in time. And so if a TIF district, for example, is established prior to April 1st, 2024, and it includes the property where those 43 units are, then the incremental taxes of that new value, which wasn't captured April 1st, 2023, but would be captured April 1st, 2024, it's that new value which is diverted to generate revenue for the TIF district. And so
I understand that.
so there isn't, it isn't
Question I
changing
have
assessment.
is if that extra units were not added, and it's set as it was during the April 1st this year with the assessed value. And now the assessor comes along and there's still no new units, but what those value of the land under it would have gone up, they would have to have a higher assessment.
No.
And that's what's missing in this
No.
whole thing.
They wouldn't be, it's only new value. It doesn't change assessing. It doesn't change the tax
The
rate.
assessment of the first units go up.
No. It's either there is additional.
My assessment's going up every year and I'm not doing anything to improve it.
Can we just take a quick time out? I wonder if this is a whole different discussion.
We get that.
I don't mean to stop.
No,
'cause
no,
it's
no,
really,
it's-
really,
but
really
it's-
important, but
Well, it's important for the recommendations that the
I
community
agree.
do.
I agree.
Yeah. And that's what-
100% agree. And we all should be able to understand it and be on the same page.
But even if it goes, you're right, we'll discuss some of it.
Yeah.
And it gets into the whole capital improvement program too.
It
because
gets into
there's a
long
chance
range planning, period.
It will have its own expenses and its own infrastructure needs. That there's no guarantee it's not gonna impact us. It's, for example, Mark has to plow, state down. All right, well, who's paying for that? TIP? Is there incremental costs to do the plowing in that area, or is it the tax we absorb as the taxpayers with the existing? That's something that has never been clearly explained. And that's what everybody thinks. Oh, you're gonna add all that infrastructure, we're gonna end up paying the maintenance on it and have to do plowing and all this other stuff, but that's gonna cost us then, but instead of them.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you all will have to be more specific on what information you need, because the answers to those questions are on the town's website, barrington.gov/TIP. And so you have to go looking for it, right? But those answers, that level of detail, to include the operational costs of additional infrastructure, whether it be sidewalks or driveways or anything like that. And so I think even that question is answered in the FAQ that's broken out as a, not just, in the gross part of it.
Okay, it's still hard to.
Yes,
I know.
but so I think being
But
more
that's,
specific.
it's hard enough, it's hard for us to understand.
Mm,
What do you think about everybody else?
That's
And they're
been my
gonna
point. It's
they're gonna say no, unless we can communicate more effectively what it means to the individual taxpayer, which it really doesn't do. It explains how the mechanisms are supposed to work and who's gonna do this and that,
mm.
but it doesn't say, what's it mean to me as a taxpayer?
Yeah, but I think, and this is, I think, maybe a point Dana was making earlier about being a representative group. To the extent that you are here as volunteer members of the budget committee, you all want all of the details and all of the discrete operational questions. Steve Saunders wants to know, where are those dollars coming from that's plowing that sidewalk? If we have to describe to that level of detail to every resident in town that's going to go in and vote, we'll never have that opportunity, because how long have you spent sitting in this room talking about those topics specifically? So the unfortunate reality is the product of public relations that is delivered to residents that we're asking to pull the curtain close and vote on something is a order of magnitude or two less detailed than what we'll discuss here.
Right.
And
And
so-
what you get is the face and I brought this up. They'll just say no, because it's something they don't
don't know.
understand and they think it's gonna hit them.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that has to be communicated one way or another.
So,
And you're right, but let's say we all agree, the TIF is the best thing we can do for the town and its long-term goals and everything else. Now, they're still gonna say no, even if the budget committee and the board say that's a great idea.
But that's where if that's what we decide to do, we have to sell it.
Well, who has to sell it?
We collectively, if
Yeah.
all of us are,
And putting it on the
Yeah.
website doesn't sell it.
well, I think it starts it. It's a good place, but then it's got to.
Who looks at that?
But when you come back, can I just,
Yeah.
what I hear us all saying
It's
is
not my
that
job to
there's,
sell it to them. It's my job to go and explain what they're saying to them.
Right.
Yeah,
If they
you bring the
want to hear.
horses to the water,
Right.
say, here it is.
And if they choose not to drink, then
Exactly.
but I think I'm hearing for everybody that they want to have some involvement and begin to look more comprehensively at a long-range plan for the town finances. Is everyone in agreement with that?
Right. And the only question I have then is, we've got agreement that we want to meet with the capital improvement program and those people and look at this whole thing in detail. We'll add, and actually adding staffing somehow. It's a good suggestion there. The question is, we're already seeing more articles that really do address some of that stuff that we have to address this year. So we're going to be confronted, and we're going to be the people with a huge total aggregate budget, including warrant articles. It's going to hit them in the face at a bad time. At a bad time with inflation and everything else they're feeling. So how do we want to approach looking at them? Just in the context of where they exist, or in the context of long-term need? And that's, I think we need to look at the long-term.
Yeah, so there's the longer term piece, there's the operational budget where I guess it's less focused on line by line, but what's changing, what's going on, what would have a bigger impact on the budget going forward, right? And then there's this thing where we have to figure out, especially this year, because we won't have done a lot of the analysis, what is the impact of the warrant articles today? And it's almost to me a stopgap. Next year, we would maybe look at it completely different than we would this year, because we've lost less time to do so. And so it's just how do we plug it this year, to me, would be the question. If that
Well,
makes
if the
sense.
recommended budget is significantly higher than last year's budget, then the people are gonna go and say no to the proposed budget and default down to last year's budget, which would probably be cheaper than what we're going to propose.
But regardless of what happens, I'm just asking, what do we do? How do we approach it? Right, everything else, it's up to the town to decide. We're just putting in our advice in essence, right?
And everybody I talk to is squeaking about the cost.
Sure, and so that's why that's to me, we have to have that town perspective. It's not just dollars and cents from our view, it's everybody. We're representing. John?
I have a call at 7, so I leave by 6:30. So do we want to get to the capital improvement or continue to around? I mean, if we want to do warrant articles, that's fine, but I thought the intent was purpose and capital improvement.
Well, what we have in terms of the capital improvement, I had to do a lot of work with the spreadsheets to try to make them make sense out.
That's more than an hour discussion and
Yeah, it is. So I think we pass on that. And I think that one of the things we'll need to do is to take Congress' advice and let's look at aggregate budget. Because the feeling is that it's more than what town really should do at this point. No, I think the consensus there, but that's what at least some of us feel.
So I guess I would have 2 questions with that. Scott was talking about the warrant articles. I haven't looked at them. Do we have per article what the impact would be? Do you have that or a guesstimate?
The tax rate impact? Yeah, I mean, that piece of it isn't there. There's in the budget binder, there's a list of the warrant articles.
it's easy to calculate. right?
Yeah, that's, you just divide it by the 1.8 billion. And that's
Okay.
the tax rate impact.
So, and I'm assuming we're going to probably continue with. We're not going to use fund balance. It's going to be, this is what it's going to be. But I did read the select board's going to buy down the tax rate with some of it. What is that number they're expecting to get back?
to
So
reduce the
right now,
tax
it's
rate.
680,000. It was the select board used 747,000 this year to buy down the tax rate. That was surplus unassigned fund balance. That would have been used to fund warrant articles if we did it the old way. It's the same order scale. I mean, it's the same amount of money.
So the bill I'm getting includes $740,000 bought down.
But that was just additional warrant articles. So yeah, right now, the projection is at least no less than 680,000. And once we close our books for 2023, we'll have a clearer picture because we'll have any excess revenue. Right now, it's just projections for excess revenue and unexpended appropriations.
Can you cheat anything?
Yeah.
So, yeah, your tax rate, what would it be?
60.
266 is the municipal tax rate. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got 1.6, right, and warrant articles not including the library, that's 5.1 million. But you want another million on the operating budget, with no idea what the county's gonna want. And no idea what the town's gonna want. School, I'm sorry, yeah, so
What was their increase? 6%, 7%?
6.9 for 6. It's 29,800. 29,815,000 or something.
so.
It's kind of a 6 point something increase.
So what's that, $1 million, $1.5 million? I don't think I'm not fired. But I mean, you got a couple million more in school, you got 5.1, so you're 7.1. You're like $8 million voting on this year. Extra money over last year.
It's gonna be huge.
Yeah.
That's,
And then you read a document that asks for a waterfall and a merry-go-round, I don't know, at the old Ramsdale Lane, it's just like, what is going on?
This guy was coming down the pike next year and the year after. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, Dana said earlier, it's the people's budget. Peter said it earlier. Voters have consistently approved, voters get to make decisions. Voters have consistently approved what we've brought to them. And, I think the focus of letting voters make a decision, ensuring they can make an informed decision, packaging up the information in as best a way we can so they understand it, and giving them an opportunity to say, yes, we support that, no, we don't support that. And it could be that they're looking at those costs and saying, well, we don't care about these additional, whether it be the community center stuff or the town center stuff or the library stuff, because we know we have the public safety building. I believe there will be voters that make decisions like that. But I mean, it's that they're going to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I get the warrant articles for saving for the fire truck because $30 a year per person or whatever it comes out to be now is better than $3 million in fire truck expenses and, a bond or whatever for that. But then you start tossing wish list items in there and that number grows exponentially. And then obviously public safety wants something and the transfer station wants something and it's gonna become unmanageable at some point.
Yeah, we may actually get a tax rate up over 10% of the state.
It's not something you guys should strive for.
Yeah, I haven't even considered what the state's going to do.
We're flush with money because we're giving up all kinds of tax revenue dividends.
So do we want to go and defer the capital improvement discussion to the 28th of November when we talk about the rest of the warrant articles?
one suggestion. That's good.
Maybe they should have worked on Thanksgiving dinner.
We'll remove all the chairs from the room and we'll all stand while we discuss it.
Depends how my abatement goes.
Oh, boy.
I need enough weight since COVID. I don't need more. Okay.
Most importantly, what do you need from me between now and whenever? So I have the recommendation, tax rate impact as the threshold. I have the conceptual idea of next year's process will be longer, doing more future planning conversations with department heads, maybe like 1, 3, 5 year goals.
You said this valuation town is 1.8
Tax,
billion.
building and land use,
One more.
tax, building and land use.
Are there any big issues we should be
No.
looking at there?
You say 1.8 or 1.18 billion?
1.8.
1.8.
Mhm.
What's the average median assessment these days?
So there's two different ways to calculate that. Realtors advertise the average sale prices, which is very different than the average home prices, but in your budget binder, you have a under tax rate, which is chapter 10. You have a 2024 tax rate impact average home calculation.
All right, I didn't know if that included,
280.
if that was updated with what's coming up.
Yeah, so that was updated with the new assessed values. And so what you see that it does is it provides the mean and median for each housing type, single family, mobile home, condominium, the amount of each of those, and then it uses a weighted mean and median to show that the weighted mean would be 430,000, the weighted median would be 412,000. So the proposed average home value calculation is 425,000. So that's your answer, 425,000.
But if we don't have a lot to talk about next week, because it's planning and land use, and there are no big increases there and really to talk about, should we use that to begin to discuss about the capital and the warrant articles?
I think
or-
that would be savvy. We might even uninvite the department heads. I mean, there's no changes in those budgets. I don't know if you all have had a chance to look at them.
I mean, if there's nothing we need to talk about that's outside of guaranteed stuff, then there's no point in them saying, wages go up X%, but it's guaranteed.
I mean, I'm sure the tax collector would be disappointed not to be able to come in and talk about the increased cost of stamps, but.
We can move right into the warrant article. So.
Yep.
The warrant articles and the capital improvement, and now you said planning. We're talking about people who've been participating in capital improvement.
Well, that's the planning board appointed volunteers. I mean, the staff.
Okay.
Yeah,
But so her involvement would have been the master plan.
yeah, the master plan and the CIP.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, 3.9% land use.
I mean, one of the things that when we get into the discussion of the CIP is how do we reflect that, and does it reflect the master plan? And that would be a discussion that she could participate in, but we don't need to look at the budget.
So building, actually, I new baby brain. The building department has a proposal to add a 20-hour, 0.5 FTE additional deputy building inspector, starting in April. And so that is an increase, a change in the level of service for that department. I'm just gonna look and see, remind myself what the value is.
So let's just start this each week. We'll look at the next meeting and say, what are the issues? Let's have them come talk, prepared to talk about that.
The issue is spending too much money.
So that's 23,000.
Yeah, always.
That's a 23,000 impact on the 2024 operating.
See, and that's one of those things that it's an immaterial standalone, but if you do that through all 8 departments, that's a
Well-
big hit. So that's where I guess, my
Yeah.
minutia, it doesn't really exist when it comes to tax impact.
This is, the reason I started preparing this document is for that purpose, right? So like, where is this money coming from?
Right.
This is 75% of the increase in the budget on this page right here. And that, it does add up. I mean, that's, and this is where it adds up to, a $576,000 increase in the budget.
So there's 300,000 per se increase that's negotiable.
These are negotiable, right?
Well, the salaries, wages, COLAs, all that stuff that's guaranteed, you can't.
That part's less negotiable, but like adding a half an FTE in the building.
That's what I'm saying, like.
That's on here.
No, like,
Adding the administrative assistant fire department, that's on. here.
isn't there a thing in here that says like, out of the $900,000, is there something that says out of $900,000, X of that, no matter what we do, would go into, or I guess what is the default budget at this point in time?
Yeah, so trying to remember, did I put a draft default budget in the initial budget? I don't usually do that until December. Did we do that, Amy? We didn't do that yet. Yeah, so we usually do that in December. So it will be there. Scott asked for something similar in a different way, but you made the comment that the comment was something like this. The budget presentation wasn't really useful because it didn't tell us what increases we could touch, what were union negotiated, what were contracted.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Out of that $900,000, $300,000 of it is contracts, whatever, new position we've guaranteed, whatever, like, there's nothing we can do about those. So here is what's left over that is above and beyond last year.
Yeah, mostly you have that, but not in the way that you've described it. So I'm trying to think, I don't think preparing the default budget would be the most efficient way to get that for you for next
No, I
week.
guess that would give us an idea of what the difference between the default and the proposed would give us an idea of what we're not obligated to spend.
What's more negotiable?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there've been positions that have been approved already that have to be reflected. So are they in that 576 or are they in the other?
Yeah, they're in the five, I mean, all of wage and benefits, whether it's contracted or not, is in the wage and benefit 576.
And how many of these unfilled
What do you want me to break
positions
those
do
out?
we want
I'll just put
to
an asterisk
say
next to
no,
things
that
that-
should not be filled for the rest of the year?
Those are open.
It's hard to write.
I don't think you can.
That's it.
I know, I need to wrap my head around it, not at 6:15.
Yeah, so if we haven't hired a fireman, but it's been approved, you can't not hire somebody.
Yeah. But if they have not been filled and they have not been still open.
They should be able to.
You should be able to fill it.
Okay, so again, coming away from the details, we also talked about wanting to meet with the transportation, the recycling group. It's not gonna be recycling.
Yeah, I'm surprised you don't have that email. I sent Erin all the stuff. She was gonna send out the email. The proposal is November 20th at 4:30. That it would be a time that the Transfer Station Recycling Center Review Committee could probably meet, and if you are all available. I got a pinger to see, but
Don't you have it in there, Scott? Don't you have an in on the transportation committee? Didn't you just set her straight and we can move on?
Well, I almost think that what we're looking at is a very different remit. I'm almost wondering if we should not even insert ourselves in that discussion, but have them meet and make a proposal, which we then take in and opine on.
so not as a joint meeting.
Right, it's not a joint meeting. It's just very simple, quick. Again, conserves our time to talk about some of these other issues.
The transfer station committee hasn't met for some time.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Peter? You can be more efficient that way?
Yes.
I don't know the makeup of the group.
Would be more efficient, but I think it would be more productive to have us meet together.
Yeah.
May I assume that the select board hasn't met with them on that particular issue?
Which one? The setting the target of revenue?
Right.
No.
No, that was a new discussion. So I think they should need to be, it should be a joint meeting because it says there's so much discretion in what is something that can be user paid and how much overhead should we pay. I mean, that's discuss what is the overhead that we have. Because our agreement with the recreation department is very similar in a sense. In that we say that we will, and we did it by positions, and the select board did it by positions, and it's with the rather than a percentage, the rec department. So that's another one to look at. But I don't think it really is something you could just plug in over there because their services are different.
But I guess for me, the only thing we're really asking is what percentage of the cost should be borne essentially by the trash.
Yeah, so we can say X and they can respectfully say no thanks. So again, meeting together, we get to negotiate
But I
that.
don't.
And hopefully come to some agreement.
Well, and it gets
To do it independently,
I would rather.
you don't get the other side's position and they may be totally opposed to what you suggest.
Okay.
So let's know that right off the top.
I mean, if we can look at each of what the fee structure is, I mean, the things that are covered by aggregate tax rates, not funded by fees, are what? The bag.
I've done a fair amount of that with Aaron, and I can summarize that and send it to you.
Money's fungible though. That's why looking at it in aggregate, what portion is covered. You know, because you could say that the trash bag fees pay for the MSW and the recycling tipping fees. But what about the guy running the compactor at the MSW and the guy running the compactor at the recycling? That overhead isn't included in that. I mean, it costs that much to operate the whole facility. We bring in that much revenue. The number should be 75%. And how do we get to 75%? I think that's the simplest way to approach it.
And
Number
on
should be
an
100%.
ongoing basis, but
Yeah.
I think that from my perspective, there has to be some logic to that number and not an arbitrariness to that number.
But I think I can break that out. I've got to do a little homework because I haven't looked at this in 6 months or more. But I think I can break out exactly what you're looking for and give the committee a report.
I don't
And I'll
want to be the
include
one
reports
meeting
that-
though. You know, how do we?
You've seen it already, but you probably, like me, you probably need a refresher.
But you know, how do we focus the discussion so we're not here for hours debating it? A simple number.
Well, I think it may not be that difficult. He's talking about negotiating it. We already know what the percentage is now that's covered. And so if we come up with something that, well, we really want to reach to 75 from 60 or whatever it is right now, and that would become our recommendation, then part of that recommendation would how quickly do we have to get there? And how do we get there would be a recommendation back to the transfer station committee. So
And of course, the key to that is bag price. So you just say, we need 5% more in bag prices, we need 10% more in bag prices, and we're at this level. So I think that's fairly simple.
One thing, the other thing is the price of the items that are turned in and that whatever their fees are charging for those.
Yeah.
And I don't know what
Those
percentage.
those should all cover their costs 100%, I would think.
Yes, and I think, again, I think I can show you that we're in reasonable shape in that regard. I think the real thing is MSW, and as Connor pointed out, is personnel costs. That's the real difference between what we pay and what we receive.
And there hasn't been a year dating back to 2017, which is when I first started crunching the numbers, that the revenue has not covered the direct tipping costs for the bulky construction demo, the MSW, the recycling. There has not been a year. The thing that has changed is how much of the staffing has been also covered by those revenue sources.
I think I've got to disagree with you, and I'm talking off the top of my head,
Yep.
so I could be totally wrong. But I think bulky waste, we were eating a good amount of money for quite a few years until we revised the rates.
I guess maybe I was talking in aggregate. So
Okay, yeah.
individual waste streams, there
Yeah.
may have been.
Yeah, we were taking on the chin on bulky waste. I'm almost positive.
So when that was happening, the trash bag sales were overcoming that tipping cost.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do we have any estimate on what it costs us with recycling out of that number?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the budget.
Yeah.
There's a budget number.
So prompted my whole question, right? Paying for it, how much gets recycled? Is it more expensive than trash?
It is.
It is.
It is.
Considerable.
So how much of it then gets recycled? It's
Well,
a,
I mean, one of the easiest questions is, do you just get rid of recycling to eliminate that expense?
Newmarket did.
People are gonna
Wow.
people are gonna have to are gonna go through more bags, so you're actually winning twofold.
They
Is
don't
you're
have to
saving,
go through the hassle of.
well, we don't have to pay to have the recycle, because they bring recycling, it's free to them to bring it. We're paying for it. Then instead, they're gonna go through, say, an extra bag a week, which adds more revenue.
Yeah.
right, but it's maybe not all or none. Maybe there's certain things that we should recycle, certain things.
And the other point to go and keep in consideration is a couple of years from now, that you're gonna go and see the cost of that waste skyrocket.
Well, that's something. Peter will bring in data that we can look at. And do we need to have?
You can increase it now.
2026 is a magic year for.
Yeah.
Be involved and tell me that.
Define magic.
You'll think magic when
No, it's the same of anything. You spend the money and it magically, we can, just comes out, gets
Sure.
printed. Down on this one.
Well, woods and pick some more off the trees.
Fraction won't be worth anything.
Okay. So for next week then.
So are we doing the transfer station meeting on what day was that?
Building.
That's on the November 20th.
It's supposed to-
That's the proposal. I'm pinging Aaron to send it out.
I can't make the 20th.
Yeah, I
I'm
got-
out of town.
That's a
Banquet.
At what time?
4:30 was the proposed.
I can do that.
Awesome.
I will try my best to get all that data together tomorrow and send it out. We'll have time to think about it.
So who, you can't make the 20th, you can't make.
No, I have to go to Co-Brown.
I could probably do
I
it.
could-
It's on a Monday.
I could
Yeah, it's like
potentially make
Monday.
it
We from
online. If that's an option.
I'll make it that long.
Today's
I mean, if you want
today's
to.
the 14th.
Yeah.
So next Tuesday will be the 21st.
We'll let that.
-1.
I think it does.
So,
No,
about 1, 2,
You think I'm
3,
lying?
huh?
You think I was lying to you?
No, I'm just going and looking, it's like,
No, I-
they don't even have a select board meeting.
It's the
so.
second to last time I ever have to go to Co-Brown before I do it.
Solid.
You're not allowed to have a day off.
The 21st was the planning, we're not gonna be doing, we'll be doing the CIP and that.
Well, with the planning, we don't have to talk about. Building, we don't have to
Building,
talk
we're
about the
talking about-
position.
I'm gonna uninvite.
Tax office.
Strongly suggest not show up.
The code enforcement officer doesn't have to come.
Well, yeah, no, we want to talk about
Oh, his
that
position.
position in building.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. If you want me to invite him, I'll invite him.
John's retirement date is what?
April of next year. But he would intend to be, I guess regardless of what we do, revert to the part-time position. So the part-time deputy.
So he's creating a position for himself after he retires.
Position already exists. The idea is the volume is already too much for the 1.5 FTE that we have. John is very efficient in his role because he's been doing it for 15 years. And once he is not working full-time, it's only going to exacerbate the problem of they don't have enough time to manage everything that's being built, they're looking at a half a dozen times, right? All of the code issues because people can't get along with their neighbors. And so, yeah, to maintain the level of service, the recommendation is to add a part-time FTE. And the long-term plan would be, as long as John is willing and able to continue working in a part-time capacity, he could train the new part-time. And then when he's ready to be done completely and the full-time and the part-time are up to speed, we just consolidate that. And it's just 2 full FTE, 2 people. So not 2 FTE with 3 people, but 2 FTE with 2 people. And that's the idea is that that's a more sustainable long-term plan.
We have neighbor disputes in this town?
I guess it's a-
That actually, I
I'll
agree.
Shoot John.
In the building department.
Yes.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah. I think it's,
All the stuff going on.
and it's revenue generation. And so